one of the things that, right, so kind of like when we look at this from a perspective, it's like, how do we get here? So what is our goal now, right? So when we look at ourselves defensively, this is basically what we've evolved to. So you got to kind of go on this little voyage with me here, okay? Because basically what's happened is I'm going to give you what summarizes who we are as a defense. And we basically created a mantra here because in the end, we wanted to be able to summarize everything, every characteristic we are when it comes to the game of football, you know, in one simple statement. And everything that we do, and includes obviously the end of the play of tackling, but how we line up, how we attack the film room, the weight room, and everything in between goes back to this one singular statement. And when you look at it, we play gap and a half defense, meaning that obviously I'm going to own my gap that I'm in, right? And I'm either going to press it back or I'm going to go ahead and tear off into another gap as needed. So the bottom line is, like, we are preaching gap and a half defense. We are preaching owning leverage. We are preaching burst to the football, right? So again, that really is what we, and I'll define what each of these things is. But when it comes back to, it goes back to, you want to play this game fast. Regardless of where you're playing it or when you play it, you want to play this game fast. So write that opening statement means like how we line up, right? Where the football is in relation to us and how we attack it. And then when we talk about the aspect of contact, we talk about taking our shot through a strike zone of the ball carrier. We want to dent and disrupt the ball carrier, right? Or disrupt. We want to change the shape and change the form of the ball carrier. We want to disrupt the football because we want to have that part of it too. And we want to, and every single play when we tackle, we want to finish on top of them, and we want to be facing the goal line. Now, I could break this statement down and talk about every statistical analysis that's in there. I could talk about every technique that's in there. I could talk about how we line up. But the simple fact of this is what this boils down to is everything here we believe in comes right from here, right? We measure yards after first contact. Simple stat, right? That translates over into like any part of the game. The likelihood is if you finish on top of a ball carrier and you face the other guy's goal line, you're going to have no yards after contact. Bottom line. So that's how we relay information like that to our players, because that's something that becomes tangible to them. They don't think about how many yards do I have after contact. They know if I'm rolling off of the ball carrier on top of them facing the goal line, I've negated the play, right? To take a shot and dent and disrupt through the strike zone obviously is where we want to hit, but then it also looks like don't be afraid to go ahead and try to change their path. Tackling is like a snowflake. No two are alike, and they're not perfect, really, when it comes down to it. So when we look at that, we're looking at like we want more chances. I made one of the biggest mistakes I ever made when I was like a young defensive coordinator, and I punished all my players for missing tackles. So why is that a mistake? Well, they ended up missing a bunch of tackles. I punished them. The next week they came out, they didn't miss any tackles. They gave up twice as many yards because nobody was willing to take a shot. They were all worried about being punished. So like I was sending the wrong message in that too. So basically it comes back to it. It's about, calculated, take a shot, but it goes back to like everything in that. We're not just saying take a shot randomly. It's how we teach. We have to teach within that. And then bursting to the football, okay? And again, owning leverage and gap and a half all comes back down to everything that's on the way to the actual football, right? So, I spent a little time in that statement, and the reason is because that defines everything that we are. Right? We can define it in one statement. So if we look at that and we say, are we doing these things? Then we're on schedule. The minute we lose these things, the minute we're off schedule, right? So it goes back to the messaging. Everybody here has maybe a different role. I know that there might be some people who are, and Jackson was just talking about before, people could potentially be volunteering their time. People could be head coaches, paid employees, whatever it is, are at different places. But the bottom line is whatever is being said in front of the team, whatever is being said in front of the side of the ball, and whatever is being said in front of the position, the messaging needs to be consistent, right? So that's when, like right there, everything I just showed you fits into everything our head coach is going to say. Our head coach is going to say on Friday night, I can count on it, he's going to talk about taking a shot. I know he's going to talk about different things like that. I can count on it. Those words, take a shot, are going to come out of his mouth. And if we're messaging that in our mantra, and he's saying that on Friday night, or he's saying that at halftime, then we are in line with everything that's being said, and the program is 100% in alignment. And it's sometimes we lose that because we do these clinics and we go, here's a cool thing, I'm just going to start saying it. But you got to think about going back, like, especially this is a good time. Like, does it actually align with my program, right? And actually look at it too. So here's what it looks like. Then we talk about, like, now the defensive fundamental prior to tackling, right? So everything that we look at, or we look at this, we look at this acronym CASCR. And and working with, and Coach Brinson's on here too from Morehead State. I worked for him at Wagner. And one of the things, like, he was consistent about with our young coaches, and a lot of times, like, I was the older coach in the room. Like, we were joking, you all of a sudden go from being the youngest coach to the oldest coach in like 2 seconds. But one of the things is like, you have players, just like you may have people that are not experienced working with you, or you may be working through things. It goes back to, to be a great coach, you got to be a great teacher, right? You got to understand the learner, like, where they're at. And you got to be able to check the box on a lot of things. This acronym CASCR is very helpful, because what ends up happening is if you're hitting on every one of these things, you've coached every part of the concept that you need. This is everything a player needs to be able to line up and play the game in regard to putting them in the right position. So when you look at it, obviously there's a call, right? There's an alignment. Okay, they've got to line up. They've got to have the right stance. Their eyes got to be somewhere and have a key. They've got to be able to understand in the framework who's eligible and who's not eligible. And again, rules by league and by everything somewhat, consistent in motions, and I get that and everything like that too, and field size and all that other stuff. But reality is, like, there's rules to the game, and even if it doesn't apply 100%, it applies to, they have to understand in context who can do what and who can't do what, right? You could take something like this and turn around and say, I'm putting this in the Arena League, which rules are totally changing if you say what that is. And then it goes back to read, or some people define, I like to use rules too, like, what are the rules of, like, that I have, if-then scenarios. Like, if I'm finding that this is not happening, then I probably got to go back. If I can't as a coach actually answer this for the player, then the player's never going to be able to do it. So we were joking before, and I said, I went back and kind of put this together for like these clinics. This wasn't in like some of the clinics. I put it back in there. And one of the reasons was because I'm watching a lot of clinics and guys are drawing a lot of lines. Everybody's drawing lines everywhere. And I'm like, well, you're going to teach that kid to do that, then that guy's going to do that. And there's like 7 different concepts that he's going to do. By the end of it, how much practice time do you have, and how much of it is, like, actually together? And can you answer? And then they start talking about, like, what happens when this happens? And they said, well, they're going to do this. And everything wasn't aligned. I start to listen to people. I said, it's probably a good time to go back and, like, revisit some of this, and, like, how we actually teach, because it's so important. And for me, how I structure it and how I've done it as a coordinator and then look at it now is you kind of look at it from a perspective of, like, and this is pretty generic. In the past, this is generic to, like, anybody, right? In your defense, you basically have this. I mean, like, for the most part, regardless of what you play, 3 down, 4 down, quarters, 1 high, whatever, like, whatever your cover 2 team, whatever you are, like, overhangs, stacks, whatever, you're going to have, this is kind of going to fit in there generically. I would say that you probably could go back. If I was doing this routinely for us, I would go back 100% and create a spreadsheet with all of this, with the specifics of the position. And the crazy part is when you start to sort and itemize it, you go, well, how many times does this occur? And how many times does this occur? Does this, like, key happen in isolation? And how can I sandwich this together and make a rule, right? If I can make a rule out of a key for a second level player that's playing outside the tackle box, I'm making that kid's life much easier if I can make that part of the rule. If it comes back that, like, there's a rule, because really when it comes to defensive football, right, there's really 2 things. There's 2 kinds of things. There's rules and there's rule breakers. The good ones know the rules. They know when the rules are broken, and they fix them. They fix them and make the rules back in place. So when you look at something like this, and again, I hope this is helpful, but you really look at, like, and I don't necessarily have to read it, but it goes right through the whole idea of CASCR. You look at the call, for example, an edge player, a first level defender, and again, that could be an outside linebacker, that could be a guy with a hand on the ground who's basically playing outside the tackle or inside the tight end. for the call, he's got to know, is it front, pressure, and possibly a drop, right? His alignment, is it wide, shaded, head up, maybe inside shade? Am I in a 3-point or a 2-point stance? You know, and again, anybody close to the ball, what's my visual key? What's my pressure key, right? And then you look at, like, you know, eligibles, tight end on, tight end off. Like, their eyes are in different places. And then reads. I just put down triangle read. You know, at some point in time, they're reading a triangle read from backside to the backfield to where they are in some way, shape, or form when you kind of get to that, right? As opposed to an interior guy, it's going to be different. Like, you know, you look at eligibles. What do they care about eligibles? They don't really care if they're inside the tackle. It doesn't really matter to them. The only thing they care about is usually unbalanced. I even put down there like weight on hand. But like the key is much different, right? When you look at a first level defender to a second level defender, and there's questions you have to answer. My favorite question, right? My favorite question is for inside linebackers, especially, do you read backs or do you read guards? I heard some great stuff. People talk about, like, you know, obviously, the back is kind of like your girlfriend, and the guard is like your grandma. Your grandma will never lie to you, but she's going to get you there a little slower, you know, kind of thing, or whatever the case may be. I heard somebody say recently. But like, I kind of like the way I look at it is, it depends what I'm playing behind it, right? If I'm playing man coverage and I'm man on the back, I probably want to have my eyes on the back, right? I want to teach my eyes to be on the back, as opposed to if I'm playing some form of a zone coverage and I'm playing a little bit more passive with it, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I could play off the guard because the coverage dictates it. Like, it distributes differently to dictate it. But these are just questions for everything you do. And if you're able to go ahead as a whatever you're doing, if you're in a position coach and you're just one of these boxes, or if you're a coordinator and you have to answer all these boxes, or if you're a head coach and you have to do this on both sides of the ball, and all three phases of the game, right? If you can answer this for everything you're doing, like, you really truly understand what's going on there, right? If there's a shadow of a doubt, then you kind of got to look at yourself, like, if you're not getting that, or if your coaches aren't getting that, then you got to reevaluate and say, like, do we need to, number one, run that? Because our chances of our players getting it are going to be much less. So I'll take a break there. I saw there was a chat question. Anybody got a question? But I hope this is something that's like kind of helpful. And it's almost like, if this is probably something for a lot of people you've seen, but if you look at it again, you say to yourself, like, I don't know if I've answered that question. This is a dangerous time for coaches having all this off time and all these clinics and all this stuff too, because we've acquired a lot more knowledge, but have we actually gone back and looked at this to see, like, where it actually fits and how I'm teaching all this stuff? I mean, we can come back with the greatest defenses in the world, but it doesn't matter if we can't teach it, right? If we can't get them lined up. So, you know, where I kind of get to this too is what I've done is, and it's kind of there, and tackle study is just a hashtag, tackle study. I'm not sure if it's an actual study or if it's just me watching film and playing with the video editing system at this point. I'm really not sure what it is, but we had Mike Singletary, who's a Hall of Famer, Super Bowl champion. He was an NFL coach. He's been around. We had him in one of our linebacker meetings, and he had a great line when he talked about watching film, and he said, you know, you can't teach anybody to really watch film. He goes, when I learned how to watch film, he used to say, I used to watch film until I found something. He said, you watch film until you find something. So kind of what tackle study is kind of all about is off of this quote from Mike Singletary, watch film until you find something. And, you know, each time, like, I look for trends, I look for different things that happen, and kind of look in scenarios too. So here's one finding you could say from, like, tackle study, okay? One of the findings is, this is pretty consistent. Like, this is actually a 3-year look in the NFL. So in the NFL for 3 straight years, right, and they're maybe not continuous, just stuff I looked up on the stats, is that every year, and this is pretty consistent because I kind of noticed that, like, all these great fundamental tackles that I would find would all be in the first quarter. And I would say, man, I got to keep watching the film. Like, I found something and, like, I went. So I kept going. I said, oh, loss of leverage, or guys lost their feet, or they have bad angles, a lot of diving, a lot of swiping, a lot of things like that. And this is pretty consistent, like, when you look at it, that year by year, like, the amount of yards per play elevates in second and third quarter, but drops tremendously in the fourth quarter. It's really interesting, like, when you look at it. And really, when it comes down to it, it's kind of like when you get figured out. Like, so when you start getting figured out and they put a body where you're not expecting to, or they figured out how you're going to line up, like, you go into a game, you know what you want to do. basically. You know what the deal is going to be. What ends up happening in the end, you're going to get figured out by the second quarter. Like, it's interesting when scores kind of with this too, because scores start jumping all of a sudden in the second quarter, start jumping in the third quarter. And you look and see, like, it's consistent from year to year. It may not be the same, but there's a rise in the amount of yards. And if it's just a little bit on average, and this goes for the good teams and the bad teams, this is everybody all together, but drops significantly in the fourth quarter. So I kind of got intrigued by this notion of it too. And for anybody who saw the Michael Jordan special, The Last Dance, the Phil Jackson, the Chicago Bulls, I was reading Phil Jackson's book recently about the last season, and he drew reference to The Last Dance. He had this great quote in there. And he said, for all Michael Jordan's acrobatic exploits and fierce leadership, we prevailed in Chicago because we shut down opponents for long stretches, especially in the fourth quarter. Our quarterback was Scottie Pippen. And then he went on to say, when I sometimes asked a player why they changed position, they answered, Scottie told me to. So it was interesting. And the notion of shutting down opponents for stretches and in the fourth quarter is like championship athletics. And it's all about stretches. And like, again, going back to this notion, these are the biggest stretches, right? In between there too. So it's a matter of, that's why fundamentals tie so much into tackling. And it goes back to when you're out of leverage, what ends up happening, right? So you work into there to create, you've basically, when you're out of leverage, your rules are violated, bottom line. So if you go back and look at Casker has been violated. Like, your rules have been violated. Your players have been trained to do certain things, but their rules have been violated. And once the rules are violated, that's easy to recognize and get back on task. And then what's the easiest way to go ahead and see that rules are violated? Well, body position is really the easiest way on tackles, is one of the easiest ways to see that rules get violated. And space is obviously one of the things inside there that dictates body position. So you look at all the way from left to right and almost look, these are not scientific angles. These are roundabout angles. But when you look at, like, the linebacker making contact, like at 90 degrees, like being able to contact through the chest area, if you see a consistency in that, you're in pretty good leverage. Like, they can get close enough where they can make that good contact in phase, you're on track, right? And then as you start to work away from the body, you start to see that things dissipate all the way down to, like, the end where you see you having full lean and they're evading, because that means they have more space to do so. That means they're running away from people. So it's one of the easiest ways. Now, there's two things here. One, there's the corrective side of it to get back on task, which goes back to the fundamentals and Casker and how you're calling this. And then there's the surviving prolonged stretches. So that's when these two worlds kind of come together, right? Where you say to yourself, I've got to survive, I've got to train to survive, but I've got to react to prevent at the same time. So the only way to train to survive in this game is get off the field. That's it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, right? And you really have three choices to be able to get off the field. You can take the ball away, you can turn over on downs, or there's one other one, which, regardless, they could score, right? So you get off the field pretty good on that one too. But again, you want to make sure that within that, you're sitting here saying to yourself, I got to identify it when I'm getting back to, what's going on. And again, if you're on a bench with players, you can go back and you can go look at some of these things and you can say, like, where are we now? And I talked to a lot of high school coaches, and they may be in a situation where you have players that you don't get back on the bench because they're two-way players, right? Because they may be on special teams. You may be struggling just because you're off track on defense doesn't mean your offense is on track, and you may be right back on the field. It doesn't really matter, but it's just a matter of how quick can I get back in place. Now, then we get to the teaching side of it, right? So with the teaching side of it, we look at, the kind of the foot placement. Everybody gets into this whole idea, and I'm going to get into the details of it, same foot, same shoulder, right? But it goes back to, if you're really in line, you're looking at being able to get off of double feet, right? If you're in that phone booth, if you're in that area, right? I can take off on single leg as the lower I work, because my body's going to extend. And then as I get lower and lower, and as I extend my body and get the full extension of my body and my feet, I want to be able to power plant and run through that. I'm not going to be able to somewhat come to balance with the full extension of my body. But the same foot, same shoulder still applies, right, on contact. But the key is, like, getting the full extension and the full power of my body is going to change on the level of the body. One of the things on the right-hand side is, you see what they're taught. With space, I allow my hips to move away from contact as a ball carrier. So that's one of the biggest indicators, and that's going to be tougher to go ahead and stay with our mantra of finishing on top, right, and face the goal line. You know, when we can't do that, that's an indicator that we're probably looking at more open space. And whatever the reason is the reason. We got to get that figured out. Here's a couple examples. So in this, if anybody's checking it out on Twitter, thank you. It's free for as long as I can remember to do it, pretty much at this point. There's no really rhyme or reason for it. I just kind of do things, and that's what it is. But these come from the tackle study. I don't even know the number, how many they are, but feel free, like, as we go. Here's just a couple examples of things that we break down inside there. I got like fancy graphics. I don't know. I figured it out. So that's me. But like, so here's an example, right? And what we do is we look at, now, first and foremost, like, we're looking at a bunch set, a heavier bunch set where 3 is not really speed, and he's worked on it now. Now he drops into coverage and gets a 3 deep. One of the keys there, he's turned back into the play, but he sees the full picture. And the biggest thing right here is he's able to close space, and he's able to drive through. Now you notice he gets the full extension of his body, and you'll see it from this angle too as he works back. They see the play action, they drop. Now, he doesn't drop off of nobody. That's the key. And again, here's the leverage, and as he drives through off the spin, you notice he's bursting through the football, and he's able to keep his cleats in the ground. One of the good parts about it too is with the game passes, you can kind of see some of the areas here, but see, like, that full extension of body while keeping your cleats in the ground prevents the spin off there too, right? All this stuff is very public. You're more than welcome to it. There's dozens of them, I believe. Let me get to the next one. Here's a good one too. This is interesting. This just goes to show some of the dynamic when we look at, like, why, especially at that. It's always good to look at the highest level, right? So you have a backer down the box. You have a low red zone situation. Okay, you have a safety down the box. He's working against the bear front. Here's some of the dynamic you look at. You had motion across. They have motion here, and you're looking at everybody's tight, and they got to sort this whole thing out. Now he's going to try to crack them, and he's got to work off that and slip it. At the end of the day, you actually look, what's interesting here about this Jamal Adams, the safety here, when you look at it, he actually backs up. That's one of the great teaching points. He backs up to give himself space against this. And now he recognizes he actually is not, he has to see the tight end, and these two guys actually have to exchange on the run right here. And when they do it, he actually has to see this, slip under the block, and then gets back to fundamentals. And I'm going to go through what the fundamentals are, but you look at some of the dynamics that kind of get there, but he still manages to get himself on top, and he still manages to connect on there too. Just a tighter look at it too. This is just from their breakdown of it, right? He has to see it engage, and that corner actually has to replace him. So you look inside there, that's all rules-based. That doesn't just happen, right? And that's what Jamal Adams did right there. There's your gap and a half with some fundamentals in there too. Okay, here's another one. So this is a real, this really speaks to some of the stuff, and Jackson was talking about 5 fights. I'm going to get into some of that in a second too. And one of the things here, right, we're looking from the back perspective, all these motions, like, and I'm going to actually, let me restart that. And here's the reason why. This is why Casker becomes so important. Because look at all these plays and how the dynamics of the play changes. There's motion, there's alignment changes, there's stance changes that come into it, with eyes, where the eyes are, there's keys, reads, and then ultimately he has to now reset an edge from a stunt and be able to go ahead and work it outside in. And it comes back to where it comes into context to find it. And as you notice with 58, when he works back over, he's got to work off of and reset an edge and then be able to stay big, explode, and he actually takes him back across the hash. And here's a good look at it too. He's now in leverage right there. Okay, and he's able to drive off that near foot, near shoulder, and again, keep his cleats back in the ground and drive through contact as you go. Okay, and then one last one from it, because we got all 3 levels. We got the back end, we got the second level, and now we're working to the front end, and probably one of the more challenging ones and rewarding ones at the same time is pass rush lanes, right? So Geno Atkins is a real good one too. And you look and see, like, there's a lot. Look, again, a lot that's going on here. We got pressure that's coming. Okay, they're max protecting it, and they're only bringing like 4 guys here, and you start to see from here. You're going to get some nice angles with the pass rush lanes. So here's the lanes right here. Okay, the add-on from the back. There actually is a miss there, but again, that's what we talk about. That's taking a shot. There's the productive miss, and now you get to an angle where it gives an opportunity for, on this miss that's productive, because he adds on because the back actually turns to block. That's a miss, but it's productive because it changes the path of him and allows him to go ahead and burst, and there he goes back to the full extension of the body, right, to be able to get back into the play, right? So does anybody, I'll take a break there. Does anybody have any questions about any of that stuff what we covered? Because I'm going to go through now what the fundamentals are with that when we talk about the tackling. That's the question. Like, how do you develop an eye? What are you actually looking for in there, too? Because I kind of threw a whole bunch of terms at you. I threw a whole bunch of scenarios. You heard 5 fights in there. You heard all sorts of stuff. Now, don't lose, and it goes back to like tackling systems. Don't lose perspective here, right? Like I said, the game is blocking, tackling, getting the ball and keeping the ball. That's the game. So I just always kind of point that out with this too. When we look at like systems, right? I'm not tied into any one system. I've done some USA work. I've spoken like Atavis. I speak to people in other sports. I think whatever. I don't, when you're looking at your system, it basically goes like this, right? This is really any system, right? Tackling, this is how I kind of look at it. Simple, right? Can I go digestible? Is it solution oriented, right? We just talked about rules and rule breakers. So how do I go ahead and solve my problems, right? Skills and fundamentals have to be involved with it, right? Safety is obviously paramount to everything. Does it simulate a game situation, right? So when you're looking at a drill, how many times, where can I translate fundamentals to be there? And then like, again, how do I actually steal drills, but also not only just steal straight drills, right? You got to steal drills and you got to make sure that they fit into actually what the situations your players are going to be in. Okay. So when we look at it, obviously, all of these systems are going to have the same thing. You're going to have to get to the ball, get into position, make contact, and get the ball carried down. Basic stuff, right? These are the one of the things I want you to consider when you're looking at it, because one of the things we look at, right, obviously, is the field. Okay. One of the things, like if you notice in some of those things, we look at like where the ball is located, like where the contact is actually made, right? Where it's made in relationship to the formation, the hash, and the end of the play. Okay, that helps you kind of like be able to see some of these things. The ball carrier is probably just as important as the tackler himself, right? So, when you want to run a route, I don't think about like anything in football. If you want to teach somebody to run a route, you're going to teach them to look at they can't just run a route. You can't teach them to run a route where somebody is, right? Really can't, right? They're going to either run past them, or they're going to run under them, or they're going to run cut outside of them. It's really what it's going to be. Like nobody's going to run a route where a guy is. Like that's coverage, right? They cover an area, somebody's there. Bottom line. So on the other side, on the defensive side, we spend so much time looking at we evaluate the player, right? We don't evaluate the opponent. So there's a lot to be said for evaluating the opponent into like what you're going to do. When you're looking at Saquon Barkley, it's a lot different than looking at anybody else, right? He's got to know in the open field, I got to push through because I can't come to balance. I got to take a shot against Saquon Barkley because he's probably going to spin off of me. He's got to say to himself, if I feel that screen's coming, like the first play, right? I'm not a first-round draft pick. I wasn't a Heisman finalist, but I'm paid to get that man down. I better run as fast as possible towards him, right? And again, you're not facing Saquon, but neither are we. But in the end of the day, like evaluation of the other side is probably just as important as evaluation of your own guy when it comes to skills. And then we look at obviously the shoulders and the engagement, all sorts of different stuff in there, right? We have basically a 5-minute tackle plan daily when it comes to it. In the 5-minute tackle plan, we talk about being able to do something that warms it up. We do something where we're going to track the ball carrier. We're going to focus on our leverage for about a minute and make the routine simple. We're going to make that routine every day and every day simple. And then we're going to work and see with our tackling work for 3 minutes and 45 seconds. That's about a 5-minute tackling plan with it too. And within that, like 3 minutes, 45 seconds, it's going to either be straight teaching, straight repetitions. It's going to be contact so that we're going to really have some competition in the contact. It's going to be probably a scenario, or it's going to be some form of choice where there's going to be either vision, decision, action, or some kind of senses that are in there too. So that's how we look at that from a perspective there. We don't do all of that at the same time. We gradually increase that as we go, but we want to make this complex situation into the most routine situation as much as possible, right? So when we're talking about, we talk about the idea of knockback tackling. we want to get as many dents on the ball carrier as possible. When we talk about that, we want to take the idea of reshaping the ball and reshaping the carrier. Like even if we miss, we want to miss in a way that throws it off the path. You know, they're taught to run on a mark. They're taught to cut off a mark. We want to take them off that mark as quick as possible. And there's different scenarios from it there. So Jackson was mentioning something from Slade Calhoun, the 5 fights. So like I said, there's so many tackling systems you could take from. There's so many different teaching tools that you take from. I go back into looking at just a guy from like that an original film back when I was first a coordinator back in like 2009, way before anybody had tackling systems. A guy, Chuck Clemens from Central Missouri. And like, he was one of the first I saw that fundamentally broke the thing down, right? But what happens is, at some point in time, this guy Richie Gray from Scotland, who has a patented thing called the 5 fights, he basically looked at like you take these systems that were fragmented and he kind of filled in the gaps with them too. So how much you actually clamp, right? Or how much you actually drive your feet, right? Or where you strike on the body, or how big you stay for periods of time. And like one of the things we define when we look at reshaping the carrier is to be able to get that hairline below the chin. And this is from a place that I was a couple years back when I was head coach. And I love pictures tell like 1,000 words, like to be able to go ahead and get a hairline below the chin and be able to flip a ball carrier over. Like here's just an example on film of that, right, of something that we do. And you'll see 29 come in from the right side of the screen on this. And as you do it, you could see that he's actively underneath with same foot, same shoulder, and he's able to reshape and reform him and knock him off that spot. Like most of this, as much as it is about getting the carrier down, it's about owning and knocking them off the spot that they're on. Like they are trained to run to a spot. We are now training to take them off that spot as much as possible, like as quickly as possible, as much force as possible too, right? That's what I'm saying. Make the complex into the most routine thing as possible. And that's what the bigger challenge then becomes over time. So in doing that, we take all these complexities and we put it into certain things. Now, it goes back to inline, open field, engaged, or really the last chance we're looking at. When we're looking at the inline, I just talked about hairline below chin. We talk about the phone booth, right? We talk about the phone, like, and the challenge is sometimes with kids these age, nobody knows what a phone booth looks like. So we actually have to explain what a phone booth is to some of them because they have no concept of what that is. But then you go ahead and you talk about like, we want to burst into dent. And again, that goes from the ability from our posture into our same foot, same shoulder as quickly as possible. When we talk about engaged, we talk about, we want to be able to play off things when we can't get off. And the reason I talk about that more than anything else is because sometimes pressing off a block will take momentum back against you. And when it takes momentum back against you, you're going to have some challenges, right? Because you can get pressed out of a gap real quick. That's usually going to be for guys that are inside the box, right? You know, at some point in time, like we said, you don't want to live in an engaged world. I'm just going to say it. Like a lot of times, you have to always have a happy medium where if you're teaching stuff about engagement, you don't want to live in that world, right? You want to visit that world. You ultimately want to get off of blocks and you want to have both hands free, but there's a reality that's not always going to happen. The open field type of stuff, when we talk, the number one rule of an open field tackle is run it back to leverage. Like run it back into leverage as fast as possible and take a shot and be able to go ahead and burst and stop his feet more than anything else. And a lot of times that's why our roll tackles happen on the open field is because the primary thing in the open field is get the feet stopped, right? Sometimes it's not always going to be knockback, but as long as you can make connections, the connection of the body, and get yourself to a position where I can get in control, I always got a shot to be able to go ahead and get back on top and face the goal line. If I can always get clamped up, I always got a shot to do that. So if I got those two worlds in my head, I got a good shot of reducing yardage after contact. Contact's going to come in different shape or form, and it comes back to last chance, which I actively look for every day in tackle study, by the way, is last chance tackles. I'm going to find one of these days. You're going to laugh when you see it. So, and then you talk about within that, what do I teach that's fundamental? What do I teach that's situational? And what do I teach is recovery? What do I teach that's in bad position, right? And in there too. And one of the things too is about letting coaches coach. So these are, and I could share this stuff with you, but this is a glossary of stuff. And this glossary is not like a tackling system. The tackling system is created based off of what I hear our coaches say. Like our coaches and players create the system. See what I'm saying? So it's very, very, they got a lot of ownership over it. As opposed to like sometimes when you look at these systems and people go, you got to have the same language. That's great. But when also you have coaches out there, you want coaches to be believers. At this, maybe a couple years back when some of these systems became like infused, maybe that was cool. Maybe we needed that. But now we got players that have grown up like as youth players within tackling systems. We have coaches that have now played when there were these tackling systems and all this teaching that was happening. So they've got different terms from around the world too, and they need to bring some more to the table. This is just my opinion on it. But again, what you do is when you look at it, does it fit into what your overall approach is? Approach, contact, and finish. Does it fit into it? These are specific to what we do now on coaching terms, right? These will get added to. Some might get removed because they may not get used anymore because we may have coaching changes. But this is where we're going to get the most efficiency out of our coaches because this is where we're going to get the hardest coaching, right? Somebody asked about keep air in the lungs, right? On the first one. So keep air in the lungs means live to fight another play. Basically, that's keep air in the lungs, basically, is when we're on the last chance tackle. Is everything like we want to, as long as we can breathe, we can stop them. That's our philosophy when it comes to it. So, we want to be able to go ahead and just get them down and swipe the ankle or whatever it is and keep your air in your lungs. Because you're still breathing, you can still fight the play if that makes any sense. But it's just something, obviously, they came up with when it comes to it, too. And that comes from